This is E&P Reports, a service of Editor and Publisher magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And sponsored this week by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus. And greetings once again. I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. Quick housekeeping. I always like to remind you, if you're listening to E&P Reports on your favorite podcast channel, please subscribe, because then you'll be alerted when we upload a new segment of E&P Reports. The same goes for YouTube. If you're watching the video version of E&P Reports, go to the bottom of the YouTube page, click that subscribe button, then hit the bell to the right. That way you will be alerted each and every time we upload a new segment of E&P Reports. Today we're talking about news publishing. At E&P, we target news publishers. We're a 184-year-old legacy magazine that now has a huge audience, both in email and digital and social media. But our roots are in the newspaper industry. We're called on Wikipedia the Bible of the newspaper industry. Today, we call ourselves the official publication of news publishers, because in our opinion, that is someone who has to craft news content, find an audience for it, and then monetize it. That's a news publisher, in our opinion. And we tend to target those people with our editorial content and how we curate information throughout the day. I wanted to get the leaders of the news publishing industry today into a forum to give us their predictions of the months and years to come as we crawl out of the doldrums of COVID-19. So today's panel, giving their opinions on just about all the issues that we can put together that impact the news publishing industry, includes Dave Shafford, the president and CEO of the News Media Alliance, once called the Newspaper Association of America, Nancy Lane, CEO of Local Media Association and the Local Media Foundation, Dean Ridings, good friend of E&P, Chief Executive Officer of America's Newspapers, and new to E&P Reports is Tracy Powell, the Program Officer for Borealis Philanthropic, plus who has a massive background in news media consulting. So let's get to work here on E&P Reports as we discuss the future of where our industry is going. Well, we got the Brady Bunch view going this morning with some really powerful industry leaders here today on E&P Reports. Nancy, you're an old friend of E&P, CEO of Local Media Association and Local Media Foundation. On behalf of editor and publisher, we know you're the past president of the Villanova Alumni Association. March Madness has not been good to you, has it, Nancy? We're sorry.
Oh, we're thrilled they made it to the Sweet 16. They probably shouldn't have made it that far. So this year, it was okay.
All right, good to hear. Dave, you're a friend of E&P. We've had you on a few E&P Reports. President and CEO of New Media Alliance. Welcome, sir. We have you in the D.C. area today.
Yes, and it's actually a little cold, but pretty pleasant. So yes.
I don't know if Nancy knows this, but Dave went to law school at Villanova, so he's an alum. Oh, you do know. Yeah. You two guys can chat next to each other if you wish, and be no problem. Dean Ridings, very good friend of E&P. We do a lot of joint projects together. Chief Executive Officer at America's Newspapers. Dean, welcome. You come from sunny Florida like me.
That's right. It's beautiful here today.
And I want to introduce to our audience someone who I'm very impressed with, Tracy Powell. Tracy, it's an honor to have you be on our first interview. You are a program officer at Borealis Philanthropic. Say it. Philanthropy. I know. What is Borealis Philanthropy? I mean, first of all,
Borealis is a 501c3, and it it houses a lot of different philanthropic collaborative funds. And so I lead one of those funds, the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund. I've been there since, for a year, but I'm based here in Atlanta, so right up the road from you.
All right. You're also founder of All Digitocracy. Do I see that correct?
Yes.
And what is that?
Well, it started out as a website that focused on the impact of media on diverse communities. And then it kind of evolved into a consultancy. So I consulted with news organizations, foundations, high wealth individuals about strategic investments in news outlets. And that kind of led to me writing a couple of white papers and so forth. So I've been around for a while.
Well, you must be smart because you're also a senior fellow of the Democracy Fund and a fellow at Night Journalism Fellowships at Stanford, but you do have some ink in your veins, right? You started as an editor.
Well, no, I didn't start as an editor. I started on the business side. I was in circulation, believe it or not. Circulation.
Really?
I also sold advertising for a while. I did that for about 5 years, and then I went into the newsroom.
Oh, excellent. It's so great to get your perspective on this. So the purpose of this is now that we're hopefully on a back end of COVID, we're entering 2021, hopefully in a positive way. And I wanted to take the industry leaders or voices and just cover a few topics. First one I want to throw out there, and I think I'll start off with Dave with this, is Dave, are we still bullish on newspaper companies in your opinion? I mean, is the value of a newspaper going to rise? Do you think that this is a good time for people to invest in the industry? What are you hearing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things happened in 2020 was this intense reattachment of audiences, particularly to local news and information, right? There have been these long-term trends about nationalization of news attention, where people are paying more attention to national general interest, particularly national political, than they had in earlier generations, right? And you had this moment of really the telescope kind of spinning around 180 degrees, and all of a sudden people cared deeply about what was happening in their local communities. They wanted to know what the local mayor had to say about COVID or racial justice issues or any number of other things, when most people didn't know who their mayor was before, right? I mean, and so there's been an intense reattachment of people to local news and information, which is good and healthy, but also good for the business. And also clearly that, there's not only a market there, but we're reliable providers of it, particularly at a time of great tumult in the media industry, right? I mean, we've had our challenges, but local TVs, now people are understanding it's got its challenges, local radio, other sources. And so in this moment of tumult, I think there is a real opportunity for news publishers to deliver what people want, delivered consistently and successfully. So yeah, I'm actually legitimately bullish.
Dave, Dean, you and I have had a few conversations on defining what a newspaper is today. My favorite example is I live in Tampa Bay, the home of the Poynter Institute, that owns my daily newspaper, the Tampa Bay Times. Even though it's a daily newspaper, it prints twice a week. I mean, what is the definition of a newspaper? And Dean, what are you hearing about the value? How are your members of America's newspapers feeling about the future and their holdings right now?
Well, we're all glad to be coming out of the pandemic. That's affected us just like any other industry. I don't think we're particularly special. Everyone's been adversely affected by the impact of the pandemic. But I totally agree with David. We are aware that while there is so much information out there, finding credible information is more important than ever. And newspapers, whether that's a digital or a printed product, are credible. We follow recognized journalistic practices that meet certain standards. And I think that's really important and more important today. And I think we're seeing an increased awareness even in Congress of that value.
I find it fascinating with the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, which I know you and Dave are both working hard on, that it's gone pretty bipartisan, has it not, Dean? I mean, you got both sides behind helping support local papers, right? Or local journalism, I should say.
It has. Yeah. In the 116th Congress, we have 78 co-sponsors, and we think that will move forward into the current Congress. So that's great support.
Nancy, the Local Media Association is not just, I mean, your roots, Nancy, we should know, you have ink in your veins as well. You published newspapers, you started and led the Suburban Newspapers of America, but now it's Local Media Association, where you have just as many broadcast partners, am I right? And pure play partners as well. Local media, value, are people bullish right now, Nance?
They are. I mean, I agree with Dean. We're coming out of this horrific pandemic. Everybody has been negatively impacted. On the newspaper side, there are two types out there: the newspapers that are investing in journalism, and we're bullish on those newspapers. And it almost doesn't matter on the ownership structure because, whether they're a chain or family owned, if they have strong local leadership and a good sized newsroom, they are seeing success. The newspapers that aren't investing in journalism, that's the category that we worry about for the future. And I don't think anyone on this call would disagree with that. On the broadcast side, hey, they are fine. Many of them had record earnings, great political year, but they have challenges on the horizon big time, and they see it coming. And I see them investing more and more in a digital future than ever before. And then we have the digital startups, and that's an exciting new category, but there really no model has emerged yet that, other than maybe a Texas Tribune, which is a very unique situation, that category is still figuring it out. So we're cheering for all. We think a healthy local media ecosystem needs all players, but challenges for sure for all.
Tracy, why don't you weigh in now, especially in today's world where digital startups or printed newspapers going pure digital. What are your prognostications and what do you see for the future of local journalism?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think, yes, people are still bullish on news. I'll say news.
Okay.
They really are keenly interested in investing in and supporting news outlets that provide useful, critical information for the communities they serve. Does that necessarily look like a printed page? At risk of sounding alarmist for the folks in print, I think there will always be a place for print. Print will have to look and feel a lot different than it currently does. But the main point is that print product has to be useful to people. And so that's where some of that challenge that Nancy talked about is. I want to point to some of the kind of like more interesting, exciting things happening in the space right now. I want to turn to Epicenter, which is a news outlet started by Mitra Kalita, the former VP of CNN. This outlet has, it was started out as a couple of different kinds of newsletters, a real estate newsletter, but then also a coronavirus newsletter. They have helped 5,000 people get vaccinated in her little Jackson Heights community in New York. And so when I talk about being useful and journalism looking different, I point to places like Epicenter. Being useful in terms of getting 5,000 people vaccinated. The health department reached out to her recently to do kind of like a case study about how they were getting folks into doors and getting shots in their arms, right? And so I think once upon a time, a news outlet, that's not necessarily how we would define ourselves. That's not necessarily the kind of stuff we would be doing. Mitra herself says she didn't get in the business to become like this vaccination point person. But the point is, in her community, that was the need, that was the critical information need that she felt, how to navigate the systems, right, in order to get vaccinated. And she helped them do that using technology and using her skills as a journalist. And that's what folks are now trying to want to invest in.
One of the tenets of Ken Doctor's new incubation was you're not just publishing the news, you should embed yourself in the community and be part of the change that you advocate to take place. And we've interviewed a lot of very successful small market operations now that they're doing that. Let's move on to revenue. Nancy, you're bullish, correct me if I'm wrong, on reader revenue, correct? Or audience revenue. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's not the end all in your opinion, right? You just can't rely on it 100%. Am I saying that correctly?
You are. It's one part of the stool, right? But again, if you don't have quality journalism, you're not going to win on the reader revenue. So you have to have a newsroom that is sized appropriately. It's not just reader revenue. That's not going to save the business model. It's one component. So we love journalism funded by philanthropy as an equal part of that stool. And we're seeing the Fresno Bee with a third of their newsroom funded by philanthropy, and 20 plus reporters at the Seattle Times funded by philanthropy, education labs, investigative reporting labs. And we're just coming off our first lab for journalism funding with 16 publishers, and collectively they're on track to raise 2.25 million by the end of June to fund journalism projects. And so we think funders now recognize that local journalism is as important as the arts, education, healthcare, when they think about their communities and where they need to put their resources. And this is a welcome new trend.
Well, that's funny because we just had Tom Shaw of Shaw Media on one of these E&P reports, who, when I asked him about nonprofit, he said, you don't have to think in terms of just throwing a switch today and saying I'm profit and nonprofit, but with the philanthropy, see, I can't say the word, Tracy. You see, it did come out right that time. With philanthropy, or philanthropic income, you can survive still in a revenue world where you're still selling advertising, correct? You can do a little bit of both, but fund the newsroom. Dean, what are you hearing on that front from your membership? Are some people thinking in terms now of how should I put this, saying I'm going to work towards that model and maybe try to find revenue in streams that way?
Mike, I think it depends on the market. I think in smaller markets, advertising revenue is still important. And in a lot of the mid-sized markets, we're seeing incredible success with events. So and it works well with a lot of the other things the organizations are doing. So I think it really depends on the market and the approach. I agree with Nancy. It's a maybe not even a 3 or 4, maybe it's a 5-legged stool.
Sure.
I think all of the components are equally important. But, I think we're going to see a resurgence of event-oriented revenue over the next year. There's a lot of pent-up demand, and I don't think we should underestimate how important that's going to continue to be.
I feel so sorry for so many media companies that put a lot of eggs in those baskets for events, not seeing COVID coming, because that was growing by leaps and bounds. Am I right, Nancy? I mean, it was becoming a huge revenue stream for broadcast, for newspapers, right?
It was, but I would say many have mastered virtual events and have found a way to make them very profitable, and led by the Texas Tribune, who now has a Rev Lab teaching the industry how to produce virtual events and sell a lot in sponsorships. So, we're always looking for a silver lining out of a crisis. And so if nothing else, we know that virtual events can be part of that mix going forward. There's a role for them to play.
Nancy, I gotta bring this up in our view today. You're sitting with the one, if anyone's watching us on YouTube, you're sitting right next to Dave now. He's immediately to your right. Dave, Nancy's to your left. One of the major ways that Nancy's organization is working to help newspapers and broadcasters through Google and Facebook. And I got to bring this up. Dave, you're working in Congress, or you are currently leading some charges to get Google and Facebook to pay for the content they exploit. Am I correct? Can we get an update, Dave, on what's going on with that kind of legislation, where your association is on that today?
Sure. First of all, I always get pegged as the sort of Google, Facebook antagonist, and I guess that's fine if that's what people want to say. But I've always described it, including on your show, by the way, Mike, as there's much more opportunities. There's a fit together of journalism and the platforms. We solve problems for them too, right? And that we need to get to sort of a new era in the relationship. I do believe we are in a historic moment, like music was 100 years ago.
Sure.
With the advent where their distribution was disrupted, and music licensing was developed in response to that as a way to return value back to publishers. But music, by the way, was a print business, and then it evolved. And that system, by the way, has carried music through a lot of other stuff, including now the internet. Similarly with local broadcast, their distribution was taken over by cable companies. In 1990s, retrans took about 15 years, was developed as a way to return value back. I think we're in a moment where our content, which gets distributed primarily through two platforms, is got to have a new deal of compensation through those systems. And we're working in Congress for a bill that would set up a system for that. By the way, there's things around music, there's things around retrans. This is sort of a new era, and we're pretty optimistic about that. And that's not happening just here; it's happening around the world. But at the end of the day, again, I think our content is not only valuable, but is valuable on these platforms and to the platforms for that. So, and if you look at all my members, they all have various kinds of commercial and other deals with Google and Facebook. I'm fighting a longer term fight, which is how do you get, what does the compensation system look like for digital news content? And I'm feeling pretty optimistic about our chances in that.
Tracy, any input on the Google, Facebook world and predictions on how, especially with what's going on in Australia and elsewhere? What are you seeing from your neck of the woods?
The same thing that David is saying. I mean, we have to be honest. Facebook and Google are the new gatekeepers, right? Newspapers used to get tagged with that marker, the gatekeepers. Now Facebook and Google are the new gatekeepers. And putting my circulation hat back on, this is really nothing new. When I was a circulation manager, I remember standing at the county fair at my stand or in the grocery store, trying to get people to come talk to me about what was important to them, so that I could sell them eventually as a subscription to the newspaper. We've got to look at Facebook and Google in similar ways. Facebook and Google might be the new county fair. Well, that's where we start our relationship with new readers and convert them through this funnel back onto our platforms where we can deepen our relationship and also generate revenue. So that's my pitch to the publishers I coach and to the industry. These are, yes, we got to contend with Google and Facebook, but our actual relationship, the real relationship, are with the folks on their platforms that we're trying to get on ours and keep on ours.
I'm going to hold Nancy for a second and go to Dean. Dean, what is the official position of America's newspapers on the issue?
Well, we think there needs to be equity and there needs to be a change in the playing field. It's not exactly fair the way things are now. So I certainly concur with David's position and feel like there needs to be a change so that it is a more level playing field. You look at Australia, what's happening there, I think that's been a good thing for news publishers. I think the devil is in the details. I'm very concerned that our small publishers are also part of the equation. But I think that's the expectation, and we'll certainly work towards that end.
I publish a 12 noon newsletter. We publish 2 news. Let's put Facebook and Google aside for a second, guys. I publish 2 newsletters a day to a pretty large database, about 57,000 plus of news executives. We say our audience is C-suite, news publishers. The morning one is exclusive. That's where we publish the stories we create. But the 12 noon, I'm curating other people's content. Now, it links back to their sites, just like Google and Facebook does. But I monetize that newsletter.
Exactly.
I'm getting some money from it because it's my most popular, because we have 3 people curating the entire industry for you. Make it easy for one-stop shop. What's the difference, Nancy? What is the difference? I mean, what I'm doing versus Facebook and Google?
No, I mean, public policy isn't our thing at LMA. We're staff of 9. We don't have the resources. And for 20 straight years, our board every year debates, do we get into the public policy? We defer to NMA and NAB and America's newspapers. They have the right folks on their team, but we choose to collaborate. And so to Tracy's point, how do they leverage the audience that they have on social media and that they get through Google and make it work for them? So we work with Facebook and Google on those things. And we also work with Facebook and Google as funders. They funded the Branded Content Project, now in year 3, a $1.8 million investment. In the first 4 months of the new program, $1 million has been sold, mainly by small media companies, because they've made the content modules available for free. They made it easy. The Lab for Journalism funding is funded by Google. It allowed us to hire Frank Buncham as our Chief Innovation Officer to run the lab, helping 16 companies, and then the next 16, and then the next 16. And so we just are trying to make it work with Google and Facebook. We appreciate their funding, but we just don't go down the public policy road, because we're about reinventing business models for news, and we have to stay in that lane with a small staff.
Well said. All right, let's move on to, I think, besides revenue, the number one issue I'm hearing from most news publishers today is finding talent. Maybe you disagree with me. Dean, when you talk to your publishers in your large organization, what are you hearing? Is it the same thing? I can't find young people who want to join this industry.
You know, I think I've been hearing that since I started in this business.
Okay.
And, you know, when I talk to other industries, finding good talent is a huge focus. It's very, very important. It's a challenge in any industry. But I think the additional challenge that we have is that we're faced with some perceptions that newspapers are going away. Newspapers are in such deep transition that it's a challenging place to work. I think we need to continue to show the value of what we do. And again, I think we've seen that over the last year. There's an increasing awareness of how important local news organizations are to their communities. And I think you're seeing an increased interest in people being part of that. So we need to tap into that.
That's a Pollyanna way of looking at it. Tracy, I'm going to assume something here, and please, by no means do I know Dave or Dean's age, but I will reveal the fact that I turned 64 next month, which means I knew Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings, if that makes sense, way back in the dark ages. You're going, who's Paul McCartney? No, I'm kidding. Wow. You are the youngest person, I think, on this broadcast today. That's just my gut. What is it about the stigma of this industry? Is there one that people feel it's dying and don't want to come in? Or is that just our problem because we're not good at presenting the value of working within the industry? What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with Dean that this has been a long-term problem. I remember when I wanted to major in journalism. My dad was like, absolutely not, because when you graduate from college, you need to be able to make a living, and you can't make a living in journalism. I had to prove him wrong. I think that also we do have some really, really talented young people out there producing great journalism. I'm thinking about, Julian Walker at Push Black. I'm thinking about Patrice, I can't think of her last name, but Coronavirus for Black People newsletter. I mean, there's some really great, but they are deciding to launch their own rather than go into some of these dominant newsrooms that undervalue and underappreciate them, and don't listen to them very well. So the talent is out there. Our challenge is to bring them into our newsrooms and actually listen to them and see the value that they bring. I'm not knocking entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur and I support entrepreneurial journalism. But if some of these organizations that we're on here talking about are going to survive, they've got to reach new users, new readers, new viewers. And that is through some of these younger folks who are doing incredible work. But we just, unfortunately, have not tapped into their talent.
Nancy, I want to turn this one over to you because you and I agree that there's still a certain, how should I put this? We did this in a previous broadcast, that there is a certain age that's still in control of that newsroom. Do you agree or disagree, or most of them? And we're just not. Is it that we're just not welcoming to new talent? Is that kind of a stigma that might be going through the industry that has to change?
Well, and I think we're not diverse enough in our newsrooms, and that's getting a lot of attention, as well it should right now. And so a lot of companies are working hard on their diversity strategy, but there are companies, Philadelphia Inquirer is one that's been very open and transparent about their process. Philadelphia, I'm from Philadelphia, is a predominantly Black and brown city. And, there are no Black or brown investigative reporters on the staff at the Philadelphia Inquirer right now, and very few in the newsroom to begin with. That's a problem, right? That is a problem. So take age out of it. Like, young people want to work in a diverse environment. It's part of their core values. And, the setup that we have right now, look at the C-suite, look at the boards, and we've got to change that. In 2018, we publicly stated our own KPIs. We had far more men on our boards than women, nobody of color. We said we have to change that. And so we found a way to change it. We've met all our KPIs now. I'm not saying it's easy, but it can be done. And so I think that is a big part of what's holding us back. And I know Tracy will totally agree.
Mike, can I just add something
Please.
to that? I mean, back in, I do know who Paul McCartney is, by the way. Back in the day, in the 80s, I guess, news organizations had made some significant strides in recruiting and in promoting journalists of color, particularly Black journalists. Had several editors who were in the pipeline to lead organizations at one point. But then we hit a recession. And as the old saying goes, last hired, first fired. Those journalists have been displaced, but they are still out there. Some of them might have started their own, but a lot of them are now working in other industries. My point is, you can bring in young talent, but if you don't find a way to retain them, to keep them, they're just going to leave. And so we have to look at what's happening internally and find out how we can better support and retain journalists of color, younger journalists, because right now all we're doing is repeating some of the same mistakes, even in the nonprofit journalism sector now. We cannot kind of rebuild in the old image because we know that old image does not work.
Dean, anything to add to that from the perspective of America's newspapers?
It has certainly been a focus for us. We are aware that our industry has an incredibly long way to go. You look across our own board, we're not diverse enough. We are aware, we're wanting to make a change. We're not conducting a program now where this issue is not front and center. It is very important. And we know, it's just good business. It makes sense. We need to look like our readers. We need to look like our audience. We need to, and I absolutely agree with the point that to attract younger, savvy employees, the kind of people we want to attract, we need to have a diverse workforce because they want that. That's absolutely key, and it has to continue to be front and center for all of us.
David, anything to add from the News Media Alliance?
No, I mean, getting your first question about, struggle for talent. I think you see in a lot of industries, but ours in particular, where people's instincts are to go get talent at the same place where they got talent before. And that's really a bad approach. Yeah. I think what you have to do is break old habits and look for talent from directions that you haven't gone before, that the innovative perspectives, diverse staffs, really infuse your newsrooms with new points of view. And this industry has not been great at doing that. And I think that's what we have to do. And two, I do believe, at least at senior levels, there's an intense understanding that that's not only what you have to do for a bunch of reasons about doing the right thing, but also what you have to do to get better, have a better product that connects with more people. So I agree with all the comments here. And in particular, where we have to go for talent is places we not necessarily looked before, because that's where you're going to find the real innovation, the real diverse perspectives, the real energy for the business.
Tracy,
Mike,
I was going to say, Tracy, you got to add now, because you're the consultant and people ask you these questions. So give us some free consulting. Where do we go, Tracy? Where should we do?
There's no such thing as free consulting.
Okay.
You got to pay for that. Where should we go? We should go to our communities. They know what their needs are. They're storytellers inside of our communities. We need to find ways to partner and amplify those voices. Go to the folk, go to your own backyard. I mean, you have news organizations that have in their own, but they've never served the whole of their community. And there are people there who are just reservoirs of knowledge and expertise that we definitely need to tap. To Dean's point, reflecting our audience, reflecting our community, I want to push back a little bit on that, because I believe that in newspapers, my chosen profession, there have been intentional decisions by leadership to serve just one specific type of audience, mostly white, mostly affluent. And you already reflect that audience, right? So we got to go beyond that. We have to look at who are the readers and users in our communities that we aren't reaching, and try to reflect those voices and perspectives. And that's where newspapers have always fallen down on the job. So you already reflect your audience. Fine, that's your existing audience. Now you get the new users. You got to grow. In order to grow, you reach those folks that you haven't been serving in the past. And so that's where I want to kind of push back on the industry.
Dean, any comment?
Makes sense. You've got to look like your community and reflect those values. Definitely agree.
Is there some kind of a playbook, Nancy, that a local publisher can find, or a resource they can go to? I know you've got the answer to that, where they can get some advice and counsel on changing that. I mean, I know first we got to change ourselves and change our paradigm as an industry, is how we look at our industry. But let's assume we want to make that change. Where would we go in order to change the entire, I guess, just ecosystem of our newsrooms?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Maynard Institute comes to mind. They've done a great job in this area. We had a chief diversity club for a year that Google funded, and we brought executives in from Mercer, the HR consulting firm. And the goal was, to move the needle when it comes to diversity in your newsroom and your overall organization. And as soon as the lab ended, COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so I felt like there were about 25 companies. They were monthly calls. They were making great progress. And boom, the pandemic hit and layoffs and furloughs started. And it came to a screeching halt. It was unfortunate. So we're looking to resurrect those kinds of programs. The industry needs it. They're asking for it. They want it. We have a call on Monday with an industry partner who is interested in putting some kind of formal program together. And I'd welcome everyone on this call to be part of that. I think this is something we should all rally around and do together. It's that important to the future of our industry.
I guess it makes good business sense, but it also allows the industry to strive for the future. If I may interject, I have an 18-year-old daughter, and I've been doing a lot of college campus touring. I'm proud to say she's got into 4 out of 4 already. So I'm very excited about that. My girl's smart. But I spend a lot of time talking to the journalism people, because obviously I'm in the industry, and I'm the generation that's coming up, and I'm going to make a statement, in my humble opinion, is completely different than the generation right now that is running the news publishing industry. They don't even look at the world through the paradigms that I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So I'm just wondering how we can do this quicker. Or Tracy, what scared me the most is some of the titles you threw out of where you see this incredible, cool journalism coming from are not the ones that the guy who's running a mid-market newspaper even know. Do you see what they're not even watching the same things you're watching. Could this be the shift in the paradigm? It's not even just the color. It's, are you reading what's coming out of these sites? So you're nodding your head, Tracy. I think I'm hitting a nail there. Am I right?
I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I said that in our earlier conversation, donors, funders, investors are looking for these kind of independent news publishers who are out there doing the work and are closest to the community and are immersed in the community. Folks like MLK 50, led by Wendy Thomas, Flint Beat by Jaquanda Johnson, Documented by Mazen Sudamed, Mukhtar Ibrahim at Sahan Journal. They are producing just incredible journalism. And, a lot of these folks were inside, let's just put it frankly, white dominant news outlets, and they left in order to be more creative, more innovative, and more reflective of the communities that they wanted to serve. That's where we see the movement. I agree with Nancy, but we also got to get outside of these industry darlings and get into the communities, to the folks who are actually producing journalism, even if it's just individual acts of journalism, because they know what their communities are interested in and need. And so that's the piece that I think is missing. And if we can grab a hold of that, then you really got something special. And that's, you know, the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund, which I lead, we invest in those kinds of news outlets. And thankfully, I'm really happy to say that we have created kind of like this pebble reaction. Now other donors are investing in these folks, and that I think is what's going to really move the needle.
All right, so we got to wrap this thing up, because I'm always told you can't go too long in a podcast because people's attention spans or what have you. So let's go final thoughts for 2021. Let's go around the table. Dean Ridings, final thoughts on the future of the news publishing industry through the paradigm of America's newspapers.
Sure. I think we'll see some legislation passed that will help our members. I think as business returns to more normal conditions, that will help our members and they will start seeing improvement. And I think the increased appetite for the value of what we do is going to continue to happen. And I think that's a good thing for our country.
Dean, if anyone wants to find your organization, it's newspapers.org. If they want to find you, what's the email address?
dwritings@newspapers.org.
There you go. David, perspective from the News Media Alliance on the months to come.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic on a range of in a range of directions. Certainly, as I've talked about before, as Dean talked about on the legislative side, I think there's a lot of political support for journalism, local journalism in particular. I think there, as we talked about, there's a renewed understanding from readers about the importance and value of this content. And I also think we're going to be moving into this very positive discussion about, quality local journalism has to get to the other side of the valley. And there are ways that it can, and we're going to start to see optimistic ways in which it can actually start to grow again. I firmly believe that, and again, bottom line, I think there's broad understanding. Anybody who didn't understand the importance of quality information and real journalism after 2020 wasn't paying attention. Right. And it just highlighted the role we play. And I think finally we're getting beyond the sort of backward looking renting of the cloth kind of thing that gets in the industry. I've represented a lot of different businesses, and this is a funny industry in that a lot of people like to start the conversation with, well, 20 years ago, they made this decision. First of all, I wasn't in the industry 20 years ago, and I really don't care. And secondly, it's totally irrelevant to the decisions we have to make going forward about building a new business. And I think we're finally getting people to focus on, oh, there is a future to this industry, and what are the rails we have to build in order to build that future. And if we do that, there's not only opportunities with consumers, I think there's a lot of commercial opportunities. We're not the only ones being disrupted by the world.
Oh, by no means.
And that also means that we have a chance to take it to get into areas where we may not have been in as much before. You and I have talked about the video component. Yep. As just one example, but we're going to have opportunities for growth, and so I am genuinely optimistic, and not just because I'm paid to be.
There you go. And if someone wants to know more about the News Media Alliance and get a hold of you, newsmediaalliance.org, and David at newsmediaalliance.org, and my Twitter handle is @newsceo. Perfect. Then we go to Nancy after you, because Nancy kind of teed it up by saying, yeah, broadcast has been making a lot of money lately, but their future may leave some opportunity for really good, strong local journalism. Nancy, what are your final thoughts about the months and years ahead post-COVID?
Yeah, so I go back, first of all, to journalism funded by Philanthropy and Dean. We specifically set out to prove it for small markets too in the lab, that the notion that only like the Seattle Times of the world could make it work, right? And we're seeing great success with the smaller publishers. Just this morning, we announced a major investment by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative for the 9 of the publishers in Word and Black to establish an education beat. These publishers don't have the resources to do education reporting. Well, now they do. And so, I think anyone in the local media ecosystem should check out the opportunities with journalism funded by philanthropy, if they want to increase the number of reporters and the number of beats. Reader revenue, everyone needs to figure out what their strategy is. Digital subscriptions are not going to be for everyone. Perhaps membership or community contributions are a better model. I worry about our role in a healthy democracy if only 1% of a market can have access to information. That is a real problem for us that we as an industry need to figure out, right? We really do. And then on the broadcast side, continue to make those investments in a digital future. Newsletters, many of them are starting membership models. They're doing new and unique things that they never thought of before. And they see what's happened in the newspaper industry and they're on top of it. And I really think the future for broadcasters right now is very bright. And I think newspapers still have a rough road, but the amount of innovation that we're seeing coming from newspapers right now is more than we've seen in a decade.
I got to say, Nancy, because I know you know Tom Shaw well, and he works with LMA a lot. When I did the last interview was with Tom Shaw about what Shaw Media is up to in their consolidation of news content, he touched on philanthropy. See, I can say the word, Tracy, 4 times now correctly. And he touched on it to a point where he mentioned this blending model. We got more response to that than anything else. People were emailing, how can I learn more? And a lot of them were the smaller publishers. How can someone, is the local media association a good place for someone to learn more about these models, and how would they get a hold of you?
We're publishing a playbook, and the Seattle Times served as the faculty for the lab, and that was part of the funding. And Alan Fisco has been great, Dean. I know
I like Alan. Yeah.
On your board, or maybe even the chair of your board, and he wants to share what he's learned with the industry because he cares so much about the industry. And so in the next few months, we're going to be issuing a playbook that's co-authored by Frank Mungem and the Seattle Times staff to try and make it easy for people. But we're going to continue these labs, bringing in small groups in a cohort setting and hand-holding and teaching them week after week how to go about this. Like everything else, you got to put the time in, right? None of these new business models just happen overnight. They are all, there's a learning process involved. But yes, and anybody can reach out to Frank Mungem on our team for help with journalism funded by philanthropy. It's the main reason we hired him.
Localmedia.org, and everybody's contactable on those pages, correct? You got them all listed
Correct.
There. Tracy, I'm saving you for last. I got to tell you, you've added so much perspective to our discussion, and it's an honor to have you. I hope we can continue some dialogue one-on-one in some of these as well. Tell us more what you believe the future of the industry is.
For sure. And thank you for having me.
My honor.
So I want to echo everything that I've heard today in terms of business models, membership, subscriptions, events, government funding, philanthropy. We're going to need all of that to support this industry. And funders are fiscal, so can't always count on philanthropy, but it will be part of the mix for sure. I think the biggest story will be the post-COVID recovery, not just our recovery, but our country's recovery from this pandemic. And the best positioned places to tell the stories and to support the recovery are community and local news outlets, not just because they reflect the communities they serve, but they are producing news and information in ways that the folks they serve consume it. So, if you are, an immigrant or a farm worker in North Carolina, you conceive information through your ears. Don't read English, little education, so you may not read or write in Spanish either. And so you consume information through your ears. And so the local independent news outlets are ones that produce that content, that critical information in the ways that the communities receive it. That said, no matter how much money funders or the government or whoever throws at this industry, if we are not producing information in ways that people consume it, and in ways that are relevant to the communities we serve, then it's all for naught. The good news is you do have some independent news outlets out there doing that kind of work. They are the ones that's receiving that kind of support. It would behoove the newspaper industry, the legacy newspaper industry, to find ways to collaborate and partner with those outlets.
I was about to say, and the bad news is they're doing that because that's where the audience will be moving unless we wake up quick. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
If someone wants to get a hold of you, learn more, use your incredible services, how do they find you?
So I am at Borealis Philanthropy, T. Powell at borealisphilanthropy.org. Borealis has a website. The fund, again, is the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund.
Excellent. I want to thank this really great group. I know your time is valuable, and all of you, I think, contribute a lot to it. I think it was a good, healthy dialogue. I hope all of you stay healthy and well, and we'll revisit many of these topics in the months to come. Thanks for your valuable time, everyone.
Thank
you.